Chapter 7, Launching a Nation. Section 3, Challenges for the New Nation. There are a lot of tensions between France and Britain. This is not a new thing. It was quite common back in these days. And the tension really built up after the French people rebelled against their king. On July 14, 1789, citizens of Paris attacked and captured something called the Bastille, which you see in this picture here. The Bastille was a fortress and a prison, and it stood as kind of a symbol of royal power, and they stormed it to get the weapons out of it. And what started was the French Revolution, and this was against the king, and an attempt to form a republican style of government. This happened in 1789. Soon after that, a war will break out between Great Britain and France. Many French people were inspired to take action against the king due to the American Revolution, which the French helped, and they wanted to create a similar type of democracy. But some Americans felt like many Americans did support the French in their efforts to be free from the king. But there were some Americans who were worried about the violent acts that were taking place. It really shocked many Americans when King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were beheaded with the guillotine, which was a new invention of the French Revolution. Still, many Americans like Thomas Jefferson supported the French people through all of this. President Washington wanted to remain neutral, as well as some others. Americans wanted to stay neutral in all of this, believing it was the safest plan for the United States in the long run, staying out of other people's business. He was afraid that if we got involved in any of this stuff between Britain and France, that the United States would be dragged into a possible war. So the United States will issue something called the Neutrality Proclamation in 1793, saying it would not take sides in the war between France and Britain. Now, not everyone wanted this. Congress was kind of divided about this, especially people like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who believed that we should side with the French. But this was passed, 1793. Now, there will be lots of threats to the neutrality of the United States. One of those threats was through the British. In 1793, they were seizing ships carrying food to the French West Indies. Hundreds of these ships were neutral merchant ships, American merchant ships, that the British were seizing. Also, the British were helping some Native Americans out west fight settlers. And Washington felt like he was going to be dragged into another war. I think the British also felt like they probably shouldn't fight another war just because they're already fighting a war with France. So Washington will send the Chief Justice, who was the first Chief Justice of the United States, of the Supreme Court, to Britain to negotiate some kind of deal. And that's John Jay, who you see in the picture here. And in November of 1794, the two sides signed something called Jay's Treaty, which settled the disputes that had arisen between the U.S. and Great Britain in the 1790s. The British promised they'd pay on any of the seized ships, and they promised to abandon those forts that they were still inhabiting in the United States, as long as the United States agreed to pay debts that it owed the British. Now, this was not a very popular treaty with Americans, and it did, have lots of protests involved. Citizens and congressional leaders thought it would hurt trade, and it didn't punish the British enough. Another issue that sprung up was the issue of New Orleans. Now, New Orleans was a major port in the South, as really the opening of the Mississippi River. So if you see right here, and we depend on that because if we use the Mississippi River to get goods to the western parts of our country. The Spanish were disputing the border between the United States and Spain. Florida, remember, is part of Spain, so is New Orleans at this point. And so Spain will close down the port of New Orleans as a part of this dispute. And that was in 1784. And this, of course, is going to hurt American economy because we can't get goods up the Mississippi River to the west. So George Washington will send a guy named Thomas Pinckney to negotiate with the Spanish to try to at least open up the port of New Orleans. And so Pinckney's treaty was signed in 1795 between the U.S. and Spain, and it reopened New Orleans, and it set the southern border at 31 degree north latitude line. So you right here where you see the 31 line right here, that is the border between the United States and Spain. Now, as we know, the American settlers were not happy with just staying, east of the Appalachian Mountains, so they will continue to spread across because we can go all the way to the Mississippi River now. That's our border. And so Americans started settling in the Northwest Territory, which is up here in like the Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio areas of the United States. But of course, they're moving on to Indian lands, which didn't make the Native Americans all that happy. And so Native Americans went to war with the United States over this. And early on, they won some really important battles. And they were under the leadership of the chief, Little Turtle. In 1792, Washington put command of the army in the hands of General Anthony Wayne, who you see right here. And he defeated the Native Americans and Chief Little Turtle in the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. And then the Treaty of Greenville was signed in 1795, which ended the war between the Native Americans and the U.S. And it gave the Americans most of Native American lands in the Northwest Territory. So if we're looking at this map here, this purple area was once Native American lands. Now it's been given to the United States as part of this treaty. Now, people in areas like western Pennsylvania were farmers, and they grew crops that helped to make whiskey. And this was a cash crop, meaning crops that made money. And they weren't very happy with the fact that the United States government decided to pass a tax on American-made whiskey. That was in 1791. Also, farmers were not happy with the fact that any case involving this whiskey tax were tried in district courts that were usually really far away from the people it affected. Pennsylvania's a big, wide area. So they didn't like the fact that they would have to travel a far distance to go deal with this tax on their whiskey. A rebellion will break out in 1794 with farmers lashing out against this tax on whiskey. The protesters refused to pay the tax. They tarred and feathered tax collectors. Anyway, George Washington was going to sit there and watch this violence happen, so he sent the army to go put down this rebellion. And as the army approached, it had 13,000 men. The rebel farmers, fled. So there was really no actual battles that took place in the Whiskey Rebellion. But it showed George Washington had the tenacity to go put down a rebellion. Well, 1795, George Washington decides he is not going to run for a third term of office. He was tired. He wanted to get out of public life. He did not want to seem like a king. I mean, that's what they fought the American Revolution over. So he thought 2 terms was enough, and he was going to step down. So he decides to write a farewell letter to the people. 3 things in this letter that he warned the people about. First, he warned against the dangers of foreign ties. What I mean by that is he warned against any kind of alliances with foreign countries because he feared that would drag the United States into an unnecessary war. He also warned the nation to avoid political parties. The nation should not be divided. It should be kept together in its young infancy. And finally, he warned against having too much public debt, that you wouldn't be able to pay it off. Those are the 3 things he warned about. I want you to think about this. Do you think the United States followed his advice in his farewell address? That is the end of section 3.